Well, good morning and happy Sabbath. It is a pleasure and privilege for me to be here with you this morning. And this is my first time worshiping at your church. But I do recognize a few familiar faces that I've seen over my tenure here at the Ontario Conference. And before I begin, I would just like to bring greetings to you from the administration at the conference office. We pray for our churches, we pray for our members, and we hope that everyone here is doing well. As was mentioned, somehow I've managed to be the longest standing employee at the Ontario Conference Office. And I have to say, God truly had a plan, because I studied business and I was thinking that I would get into the world of advertising. But I got a summer job at the conference doing income tax returns. And when that finished, they had an opening and I haven't left yet. So the way it's looking like, I may be there until God comes, or I might leave before, who knows. But in my role in the Plan Giving and Trust Services Department, we assist our church members with estate planning. And so as you probably saw that little ad this morning, it's Make a Will Month here in Ontario. And so if any of our church members are wondering, how they get this done or what's involved in it, I'll be explaining that a little bit more this afternoon. And we are here to help serve anyone that is in need. Well, this morning, we're going to take a look at a story in the Bible. And I'm going to say it's a very important story. It's about one of God's miracles. And I say that it's important because of all the miracles that Jesus performed. This is the one that is reported in all four Gospels. And so as we get into this story this morning, we're going to look at it from a stewardship perspective, and we're going to jump from all four of the Gospel writers. Now, as we set the background, John the Baptist has been murdered. And the scriptures tell us in Matthew 14:13 that when Jesus heard of this, he departed by boat to a deserted place by himself. I imagine that he wanted some privacy. He wanted to get away after he had heard this news. He wanted to get some rest. He probably wanted to reflect and to even grieve. But in order to do that, the book of Luke tells us that Jesus and his disciples went to a deserted place belonging to the city of Bethsaida. Now, Jesus and his disciples are tired, they're hungry, they haven't had anything to eat, and they just want to get some rest. But as they are discussing their plans and trying to figure out where it is they're going to go, we're told in the Desire of Ages that some among them had noticed the direction that Jesus and his disciples were going, and some even followed him by boat. Now, very quickly, the word starts to spread where Jesus and his disciples are heading. I can only imagine if they had the technology that we have today. CNN would probably have sent a helicopter up there. There would be people sending text messages. It would be live streamed. They would see exactly where Jesus was going. And it says that people in the cities surrounding even left on foot, running to go where Jesus was. And so that gets into our very first lesson this morning. We need to make sure that we seek Jesus. As stewards, and if you can get the first slide up there for me, please, we need to be focused on Jesus. We need to look for him in our everyday lives. We need to connect with him, we need to worship him, and we need to listen to him and do his will. When we seek him, when we do that, then we are going to be able to make it through any of those difficulties, any of those challenges that come to us. We're told in Scripture, Psalms 46:1, God is your refuge and strength, a very present help when you're in trouble. Oh, I guess it would help if I turn this on. Thank you. And so when we have any of those hardships, whatever it might be, that is a text that we can all cling on to. God is with us when we are in trouble. And so, okay, does anybody recognize this gentleman? A few of us, some of us might have even frequented his establishment. Colonel Sanders. Well, he was a very hard-working entrepreneur. But he didn't have a personality that really endeared himself to a lot of people. And he did a variety of odd jobs throughout his life. And did you know that he even worked as an attorney for 3 years? But his legal career ended when he got into a courtroom brawl with his very own client. Didn't last too long. But in the 1930s, the Colonel started a restaurant that we all know, and he managed it. And in 1952, he started franchising his secret recipe. And he sold his business for $2 million in 1964 at the age of 73. But in 1979, he gave an interview, and he shared his story of salvation. And he said this: "When I started the chicken business, I was sinful and all. But I prayed to God that if he made it a success, I'd see that his cause was always remembered and taken care of first." And so he did do that. He donated to charities. He sent thousands of kids through school, through scholarships, but something in his life was still missing. And he went on to say in that interview, "I couldn't reach him in my sinfulness. I used to curse terrible ever since boyhood. When I went into railroading, I got into the habit of it, and I wanted to quit, but I could not to save my life." He goes on to say, "I knew my soul would go to hell. My tithing and going to church and living right with my fellow man, that's not going to get you to heaven. You can join the church, you can serve on committees, you can be baptized and even receive communion and not be saved." He says, "I know. It happened in my life. There I was. I didn't have enough spiritual power in my life to keep me from cussing. I know there is an experience of salvation. It is my personal experience today. I know that I am right with God and that all my sins are pardoned." See, this man who started this chicken business made a decision to follow Jesus. And when he did, he noticed that two things happened in his life. The very first thing that he said is that he was saved. And the second thing was his desire to swear was completely gone. See, when we seek Jesus, just like the multitudes in our story, just like the Colonel did, amazing things can happen. Now, I envision this, that as Jesus was there and as he was traveling to that location, as the people were watching him, the numbers probably started out very small. There was probably 5. They told another 5, who told another 5, and they probably realized as to why people were going. Someone probably said, "I imagine my child is sick, and I'm taking there just so that they can see Jesus." And then somebody probably realized, "My mom is sick. I need to go there too." And the numbers kept on growing. And there were now, I'm guessing, probably about 1,000 people traveling to where they think Jesus and their disciples are headed. Now, the Bible does not get into this specifically, but I ask you to use your sanctified imaginations with me. As these people were traveling, in these cities, there was a little boy. And that little boy probably saw these crowds that were heading to where Jesus was going. And I imagine that he probably went home and he got a hold of his mom. And he said, "Mom, people are going to see Jesus, and I want to go as well." And that mother made sure, like many mothers do, I know my mom would be the same thing. If I were to call my mom right now and say, "Mom, I'm coming over," the first thing she's going to do is start cooking food. Anyone have a mom like that? Most of us. I imagine that this mom said, I want my son to go to be around this man that I've heard of named Jesus, because there's something positive that he can pick up from him. But I am not going to send my son there without something to eat. And so this mom, she looked around because she wanted him to have something. She didn't have much, but as she took a look, she settled on what she knew he needed: 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And as she gave that to him, I imagine he grabbed that and he rushed out the door to see Jesus. You know, sometimes a mother just knows. You know, a mom wants their child to be grounded in the faith. Dads too, but moms are special. You know, and as I look over here, as you see this Bible over here, you know, over 30 years ago I was at Andrews University. And my mom called me and she said, you know, Alvin, I need you to buy me a Bible and I need you to buy me a hymn book. And she sent me some money, and she knew I was coming home for the U.S. Thanksgiving. And so I went to the ABC and I took a look, and I saw there was 2 sets over there. There was one that was going to cover the cost, but it didn't look that good. And I said, you know what, there's another one, it looks a lot better, but now I have to dip into my own pocket. And you know, students, we're not, you know, that financially well off at a certain point there when we're in school, but I took a look and I said, you know what, this is for my mom. And my mom needs to have the best. And so I made the purchase. I went home at the American Thanksgiving, and I said, Mom, here's what you asked for. She said, you know, did the money cover? I said, not entirely, but it's okay. And she's like, no, I'll give it to you. I said, Mom, it's for you. Don't worry about it. So now we fast forward to Christmas. And so I open a package from Mom and Dad, and what do you think I found? The very Bible that I had purchased for Mom. This Bible here has accompanied me when I go out to churches for 30 years. You know, a mom sometimes just knows. And so as we think of us as stewards, we need to have a plan. We need to be prepared, and we need to look at the long term. And when we look at what God has blessed us with, we need to use those blessings for His glory. You know, there's a song that I remember singing in Sabbath school. This little light of mine, I need to let it shine. As a church, what can we do? As a conference, what can we do to let that light shine in the communities that we're in? Because, see, God has given you, God has given me a very specific talent that nobody else has. And we need to use that talent so that we can use it specifically for His glory. Now, the crowd continued to grow, and it was now numbering in the thousands. And there was a buzz in the air as men, women, and children made their way to Jesus. But the Desire of Ages tells us this: before Christ reached the shore and the multitude was there waiting for Him, He landed unobserved by them. And He was able to spend just a little bit of time alone with His disciples. But Ellen White goes on to give us further details. And she says, from the hillside, He looked upon the moving multitude, and His heart was stirred with sympathy. As interrupted as He was and robbed of His rest, He was not impatient, because He saw the greater necessity that demanded His attention. And He noticed that the people were coming, and they were still coming. And when He saw that, she says, He was moved with compassion toward them, because they were as a sheep not having a shepherd. Now, Jesus could have seen that, and He could have continued to take that rest. But she says He left His retreat, and He found a place where He could minister to them, because they received no help from the priests and rulers, but the healing waters of life that flowed from Christ as He taught the multitude the way of salvation. They listened to those words that were freely flowing from His lips. And the healing of His divine hand brought gladness and life to the dying, and ease and health to those suffering with disease. The day, she says, seemed like heaven upon earth, that they were utterly unconscious of how long it had been since they had eaten something. Now, I don't know about you. I've been a church attendee all my life. But when the sermon goes to a certain length, something happens. Especially if there's a potluck and I smell something. My focus shifts from the person up front to somewhere else. I have never been yet attending a sermon where I've completely lost track of time. But that is what happened that day with Jesus. The crowd was so mesmerized with what he was saying, they did not know that the day had slipped away. But I imagine that one of the disciples that were there, as they looked up in the sky, and as they probably had a moment like myself, their stomach started to growl, it connected to their brain, and it said it's time to eat. And so they probably called the other disciples and said, hey, Jesus is tired, it's time to wrap up, we need to go. Now, Ellen White says, he had labored all day without food or rest. He was pale from weariness and hunger, but he could not withdraw himself from the multitude that pressed upon him. So Matthew 14:15 says this, the disciples came together and said, this is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away so that they can go into the villages and buy themselves food. But in the following verse, Jesus says this, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. Which gets into our next lesson. As stewards, we need to attend to the needs of others. We need to follow the example that Jesus set. He was tired, he needed rest, but he had compassion on the needs of the multitude. Just as was shared this morning with the story with the coat. When there is a need, we need to attend to it. In our everyday lives, we need to show compassion. It would have been so easy to say, everybody go home, get your own food. But Jesus shows us that we clearly need to help others, even at times when it's uncomfortable. June 6, 2024, 81 years ago, World War II, there was D-Day, the invasion on the beaches of Normandy. The world was at war, and soldiers assembled to fight for the needs of others. But before the war started, there was a British gentleman by the name of Nicholas Winton. He was supposed to go on a ski trip to visit a friend in Czechoslovakia, but instead, he decided to go visit the friend because he was invited to do something else, to go see the plight of what was happening pre-World War II. And when he arrived, he was completely horrified with what he saw. The city was rapidly filling up with people that were trying to escape the Nazis. Many of them Jewish, from Germany and Austria, and a part of Czechoslovakia, Sudetenland, that Hitler had annexed. Now, these refugees were living in squalid conditions, in overflowing camps, and with winter coming, they were struggling to survive. And what really got this gentleman was that he saw there was an issue with the children. And he knew something needed to be done to save them. And as a result, the rescue operation known as the Czech Kindertransport came into effect. In 1938, Nicholas Winton organized a program that helped unaccompanied Jewish children from Prague flee the Nazi forces and hide with London host families. And the first group actually left March 14, 1939. And then transports after that left from ships from the German coast to London. In the end, it was estimated that this gentleman helped 669 children escape before Britain declared war on Germany in 1939, thus ending the program. Now, during the daytime, he worked his regular job on the stock exchange, but in the afternoons and evenings, his rescue efforts happened. And he made a great effort to raise money to find foster homes to bring as many children as he could to safety. And the interesting part is that the world had no idea of what he did. until one day his wife was up in the attic in their house in England, and she found a suitcase. And when she opened that suitcase, she found a scrapbook that contained the pictures and the names of all the children that he had brought to safety. Now, his story is told in a Hollywood movie called One Life, and the title is taken from the Talmud, the book of the Jewish law, which says this: whoever saves one life saves the world entire. And after Sabbath tonight, if you want to see the impact of what he did, just put in his name, Nicholas Winton, in YouTube. And there's a very powerful video there, just 1 minute and 39 seconds. It's worth watching. It shows you the impact of what he did. Now, in 2007, he returned to Prague, where he received accolades. And in his speech, he said this: one can only hope somehow or other goodness, kindness, truth, and honor will prevail. People will realize it's not good enough just to say, today I have done no harm. It's been a good day. But we should be able to say, I was given the opportunity today and I did some good. This is the opportunity that Jesus was showing his disciples when he said, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. Now, the disciples were probably shocked. How are they going to feed over 5,000 men, women, and children? They did not know what they were going to do. They were at a loss. But Jesus gives us some further insight into this story. In John chapter 6, verse 5, Jesus said this to Philip: where shall we buy bread that these may eat? But he said this to test him because Jesus knew what he was going to do. He wasn't worried. The crowd that was there to see him, they knew who they were there to see. But the disciples, the people that had been with this journey with Jesus, everywhere he had gone, they had seen water turn to wine. The sick and oppressed were healed. They were in the boat when the storm on the sea was calmed. They forgot who they were with, sometimes just like us. But Philip answered Jesus and he said, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that everybody can have even just a little. But Mark tells us, chapter 6, verse 38, he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. See, the disciples were looking at the crowd and they were at a loss. Where I'm assuming Jesus was looking and saying, is that a problem? We could have more people here because of what I'm about to do. Now, while all of this was going on, remember, using my sanctified imagination, a mother had packed something for a little boy. He, of all people, did not have to worry about a thing. He could have eaten at any time. The problem was not his. But the Bible does not say how he was approached. And I figure it was one of two ways. Either he was right there and he heard the conversation, or he was deep in the crowd when the disciples went. But he answered the call when it came, which gets into our fourth lesson. We must be willing, and God can use anyone. See, it doesn't matter how old you are. God is going to work through us if we share what he has blessed us with. Our skills and abilities are limited if we only use them for ourselves and not God's cause. The Bible says one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter, said to him, here is a lad who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many? The devil is going to believe that God's not going to come through. But as we said in Psalms 46:1, he is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. God is going to be with us today. He's going to be with us tomorrow, just as he was with that multitude on the mountainside. Luke 9:14 says, then he said to the disciples, make them sit down in groups of 50. And they did so and made them sit. And then he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke them. And he gave them to the disciples so that they could give them to the multitude. And when they all ate and were filled, 12 baskets of fragments were left over to be taken up by them. Which tells us with our last lesson, we need to follow God's leading. In order to survive in this world, as stewards, we need to make sure that we prayerfully can seek his guidance. Ellen White says that the people were weary and faint. There were mothers with babes in their arms and little children that were clinging to their skirts. Many had been standing for hours, and they had not thought of even sitting down. And there was actually great danger of them trampling on each other. But Jesus would give them a chance to rest. And he told the disciples, have them sit down in groups of 50 or 100 in order to preserve order. Now, sometimes, in our lives, when we get that stress, we want to lead Jesus. We want to tell Jesus, Jesus, this is what I need you to do for me. But sometimes we need to sit down and follow his leading and patiently wait and see how he will work through us. We've all had problems. I know I've had challenges along my way too. But when I take a look at life and I look at the situation objectively, there's always a lesson to be learned. And the question is the glass half empty or half full? Now, the disciples had a half-empty mindset. They're here, there's all of these people, and it turns to money now because we don't know what to do. Their confidence was wavering, their anxiety levels were going up, not different from me or maybe even you today. But when they followed what Jesus had set, the little boy's meal turned into a buffet. And as he handed that out to the people, it's the same thing. As God gives us things, as stewards, we now can use this and pass that on to somebody else. And when we follow Jesus' plan, others are going to reap the benefit. See, if we look at math, 5 + 2 is 7, which means 7 people will probably get to eat something. But when you take that and you put that in God's hands, addition turns into multiplication. Jesus is now able to take that 5 and 2 and feed over 5,000 men and women and children, and there's a remainder of 12. There's a significance to this remainder as well. The Desire of Ages says that after the multitudes had been fed, there was an abundance of food that was left. But he who had infinite power at his command said, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing is to be lost. And these words meant so much more than just putting bread into baskets. Nothing is to be wasted. We should neglect nothing that is going to benefit another human being. Let everything be gathered up that will relieve the necessity of earth's hungry ones. And there should be the same carefulness in spiritual things as well. When those baskets were collected, the people that were there that day wanted to make sure that they shared with those in their community. And they carried it out so that it went out into those regions so that their hunger could be satisfied as well. The providence of God had placed Jesus where he was, and he depended upon his heavenly Father for the means to relieve the necessity and to solve the problem. We too are to depend on God, and the work is God's, and he will bless us as we follow it. And if we can do that, we just might have a loaves and fishes experience. I work together with the Pathfinder Club in my church. And one of the things that we do is we send out bags into the community, and the kids will go out there, and they'll deliver these bags, and then the following week we go and we collect those bags. And so we had these notices, we took the children out, and we put the bags there, and we said, it was just before Thanksgiving, we want to make sure that the need in the community is going to be taken care of. And so recognizing that it's a little tight for everybody, we didn't know what we were going to get. And so it was Sabbath, we went there to collect the bags, and we got there, we said a prayer, and then the kids went out. And so I was there at the Community Services Center with one of the workers there, and we waited. And after a while, a car came back. And so you can see this is the place where the food is to go. And we looked at it and we said, okay, might not be so good this year. But the stewardship call went to the community. And after a while, the cars started to come. And they kept on coming. And now we started unloading bags. And the kids were coming there with these bags. And we were piling them up. And then we thought we were done. And all of a sudden, people said, no, we got to go back because we didn't finish the street. We see more bags there. And so they went back again. And by the time it was done, this is what we ended up with. There was a stewardship call to the community, and they answered. And I would like to imagine now that as a result of those bags, people enjoyed something for Thanksgiving. It's amazing what happens when we work together with God. There is nothing that God cannot do. Mark 16:15 tells us this: "Go ye into the world and preach the gospel to everyone." That is what we are to do. And I close with this thought. Ellen White says this in Desire of Ages: "So when you are surrounded by souls in need, know that Christ is there. Commune with him. Bring your barley loaves to Jesus. The means in our position may not be sufficient as we think to do the work. But if we move forward in faith, believing in the all-sufficient power of God, abundant resources will open before us. If the work be of God, he himself will provide the means for its accomplishment." So, as Seventh-day Adventist members here in this community, there's a need. There's a need in Ontario. And as we look at the news this past week, there's even a need in the Caribbean. And so I ask you, as we think of what we can do, when God calls upon us, what are we going to give?